The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training compound as Sarah Martinez knelt beside her standard-issue rifle, her brow furrowed in concentration. The weapon had jammed during the previous day's exercises, and she was determined to get it working properly before the next drill. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, dismantling the firing mechanism piece by piece. Sarah had always been different from the other soldiers in her unit. While most of them came from military families or had dreamed of army life since childhood, she had stumbled into this world almost by accident. 3 years ago, she had been a college student studying engineering, living a quiet life in a small town in Ohio. But when her younger brother was killed in a car accident caused by a drunk driver, everything changed. The grief had consumed her for months. She dropped out of college, drifted from job to job, and felt completely lost. It was her brother's best friend, a Marine recruiter, who suggested she consider military service. Sometimes, he had told her, the best way to find yourself is to serve something bigger than yourself. The words had resonated with her, and within weeks she found herself at boot camp. Now, as she worked on her rifle, Sarah reflected on how much she had changed. The scared, grieving girl who had enlisted was gone, replaced by a confident soldier who had earned the respect of her peers through sheer determination and skill. She had excelled in marksmanship, tactical planning, and field operations. Her engineering background had proven invaluable when it came to understanding weapon systems and communication equipment. The rifle's bolt slid back into place with a satisfying click. Sarah smiled to herself as she reassembled the weapon, testing each component to ensure it functioned smoothly. She had always been good with her hands, a trait that had served her well both in her abandoned engineering studies and in her military training. As she worked, other soldiers began filtering into the training area for the morning briefing. Sarah noticed the usual mix of faces, some eager, some tired, all focused on the day ahead. She had formed solid friendships with several of them, particularly Maria Santos, a tough woman from Texas who had become like an older sister to her. The training compound buzzed with activity as various units prepared for their daily exercises. Sarah's unit was scheduled for urban warfare training, something she had grown to enjoy despite its challenges. The scenarios required quick thinking, adaptability, and teamwork, all skills that had become second nature to her over the past 3 years. She stood up, slinging the now functioning rifle over her shoulder, and joined her squad mates near the briefing area. The morning air was crisp, carrying the familiar sounds of military life, shouted commands, the rumble of vehicles, and the steady rhythm of soldiers marching in formation. What Sarah didn't know was that today would be different from all the others. Today, a high-ranking general was visiting the base, conducting what was supposed to be a routine inspection of various units. General Harrison was known throughout the military for his sharp eye and ability to spot exceptional talent among the ranks. He had built his reputation on recognizing potential in unexpected places and had been responsible for several soldiers receiving opportunities that changed their careers forever. The general moved through the base with his small entourage, observing training exercises and speaking briefly with unit commanders. He was particularly interested in seeing how soldiers handled equipment malfunctions and adapted to unexpected situations, qualities that were essential for the kind of specialized operations he oversaw. Sarah finished her equipment check and looked around at her fellow soldiers. They were a good group, she thought, each bringing their own strengths to the team. There was Rodriguez, who could navigate any terrain blindfolded, Thompson, whose calm demeanor never wavered under pressure, and Jenkins, who had an uncanny ability to anticipate enemy movements during training scenarios. As the morning briefing began, Sarah listened intently to the day's objectives. They would be practicing building clearance techniques in a mock urban environment, working in small teams to neutralize simulated threats while protecting civilian targets. It was challenging work that required precision, communication, and split-second decision-making. The instructor outlined the scenario. A terrorist cell had taken control of a small town, and their unit was tasked with removing the threat while minimizing collateral damage. Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with these exercises. Each training session felt real to her, as if the stakes were genuinely high. What none of the soldiers knew was that General Harrison was specifically looking for candidates for a highly classified unit, one that operated in the shadows, taking on missions that officially didn't exist. This unit had a reputation that was whispered about in certain military circles, known only by a code name that struck fear into the hearts of enemies and inspired awe among allies. As Sarah made final adjustments to her gear, she had no idea that her life was about to take a dramatic turn. The skills she had developed, the determination that had carried her through her darkest moments, and the natural leadership qualities she had discovered within herself were about to be noticed by someone with the power to change everything. The morning sun climbed higher, and the training exercise was about to begin. Sarah checked her weapon one last time, unaware that this simple action would soon catch the attention of one of the most powerful military leaders in the country, setting in motion events that would transform her from a regular soldier into something extraordinary. The urban training facility stretched out before them like a ghost town, complete with concrete buildings, narrow alleyways, and simulated civilian areas. Sarah's team of 4 soldiers moved through the entrance briefing, each member assigned specific roles for the exercise. She had been designated as the team's primary marksman, a responsibility that both thrilled and challenged her. General Harrison watched from an elevated observation platform, his trained eye scanning the various teams as they prepared for the simulation. He had seen thousands of soldiers throughout his career, but he was looking for something specific today. Someone with the rare combination of technical skill, mental toughness, and instinctive tactical awareness that his special unit required. Sarah's team entered the mock town from the eastern approach, moving in a tight formation that had become second nature through months of practice. Rodriguez took point, his eyes constantly scanning for potential threats. Thompson covered the rear while Jenkins monitored their flanks. Sarah positioned herself where she could provide overwatch support, while remaining mobile enough to adapt to changing situations. The first challenge came quickly. As they rounded a corner near what appeared to be a civilian marketplace, simulated gunfire erupted from multiple directions. The exercise controllers had set up an ambush scenario, complete with pop-up targets and smoke grenades that created realistic battlefield confusion. Sarah's training kicked in immediately. While her teammates sought cover and began returning fire, she spotted something the others had missed: a sniper position in a third-story window that had a clear view of their current location. Without hesitation, she signaled to her team and began moving to a flanking position that would give her a clear shot. The movement required her to cross an exposed courtyard while under simulated enemy fire. Sarah kept low, using available cover while maintaining awareness of her team's position and the overall tactical situation. Her engineering background had taught her to think systematically about problems, and she applied this same logical approach to combat situations. From his observation point, General Harrison leaned forward with interest. Most soldiers in this situation would either freeze or rush forward without proper planning. This soldier was doing something different. She was thinking 3 moves ahead while executing her current maneuver flawlessly. Sarah reached her intended position and quickly assessed the shot. The distance was challenging, requiring her to account for wind conditions and the angle of approach. She steadied her breathing, aligned her sights, and fired. The simulated sniper target dropped immediately, eliminating the threat that could have compromised her entire team's mission. But the exercise was far from over. The scenario escalated as new threats appeared, including simulated hostages that required careful identification and protection. Sarah's team had to clear multiple buildings while avoiding civilian casualties, a complex challenge that tested both their shooting accuracy and their judgment under pressure. During one particularly intense building clearance, Sarah's rifle jammed at the worst possible moment. She was leading her team up a stairwell when enemy targets appeared on the landing above. Instead of panicking or calling for backup, Sarah immediately transitioned to her sidearm, while simultaneously working to clear the jam with her offhand. The malfunction cleared just as she reached the landing, and she was able to engage the targets with precise shots that neutralized the threat without endangering the simulated hostages positioned nearby. The entire sequence took less than 30 seconds, but it demonstrated a level of weapons handling and tactical thinking that impressed even the experienced exercise controllers. General Harrison made a note on his tablet, his interest clearly piqued. The soldier's ability to manage equipment failures while maintaining tactical effectiveness was exactly what he looked for in potential candidates for elite units. But he needed to see more before making any decisions. The exercise continued for another 2 hours, presenting Sarah's team with increasingly complex scenarios. They encountered everything from booby traps to psychological warfare tactics designed to test their mental resilience. Throughout it all, Sarah demonstrated not just individual skill, but an ability to coordinate with her teammates in ways that maximized their collective effectiveness. During one scenario, her team was pinned down by multiple enemy positions, and their communications equipment was damaged by simulated electromagnetic interference. Sarah took the initiative to establish hand signals and coordinate a complex flanking maneuver that allowed them to overcome a numerically superior enemy force. Her leadership wasn't the loud, commanding type often portrayed in movies. Instead, it was quiet and confident, based on competence rather than authority. Her teammates naturally looked to her for guidance because they trusted her judgment and knew she would never put them in unnecessary danger. As the exercise neared its conclusion, Sarah faced her biggest challenge yet. The scenario called for a precision shot to neutralize a high-value target who was holding multiple hostages in a confined space. The angle was difficult, the lighting was poor, and the margin for error was essentially zero. Sarah studied the situation carefully, considering multiple approaches before settling on her plan. She positioned herself at an unexpected angle, using a reflection in a broken window to line up her shot. The technique was unconventional but demonstrated creative problem-solving under extreme pressure. Her shot was perfect. The target was neutralized, the hostages were safe, and her team completed their mission with 0 casualties. As they walked back to the debriefing area, Sarah felt the satisfaction that came with a job well done. But she had no idea that her performance had just earned her a place on a very short list. General Harrison closed his tablet and spoke quietly to his aide. There was something special about this soldier, something that couldn't be taught in any training program. She had the kind of natural tactical instincts and unflappable composure that his unit desperately needed. The debriefing session was routine, with instructors providing feedback on the exercise and highlighting both strengths and areas for improvement. Sarah listened attentively, always eager to learn and refine her skills. She had no idea that her military career was about to take a turn that would challenge everything she thought she knew about herself and her capabilities. As the soldiers began cleaning their weapons and preparing for the next training session, General Harrison made his decision. This was the soldier he had been looking for, and tomorrow her life would change forever. The next morning arrived with an unusual tension that Sarah couldn't quite identify. As she prepared her gear for what she assumed would be another routine training day, she noticed several of her fellow soldiers whispering among themselves, casting curious glances in her direction. Maria Santos approached her with a puzzled expression. "Martinez, you're supposed to report to Building 7 instead of joining us for morning exercises," Maria said, checking her notepad twice. "Orders came down from command about an hour ago. Nobody knows what it's about." Building 7 was unfamiliar territory for Sarah. Located on the far side of the base, it was one of those structures that regular soldiers rarely had reason to visit. The building itself was unremarkable, a standard military office complex with reinforced windows and security checkpoints that suggested it housed something more important than routine administrative functions. Sarah made her way across the base, her mind racing through possible explanations for the unusual summons. Had she made some mistake during yesterday's exercise? Was this about a disciplinary issue she wasn't aware of? The uncertainty gnawed at her as she approached the building's main entrance. The security checkpoint was more thorough than she expected. The guard examined her identification with unusual care, made several phone calls, and even conducted a brief background verification before allowing her to proceed. Sarah had never experienced this level of scrutiny on her own base, and it only added to her growing sense that something significant was happening. She was directed to a conference room on the 3rd floor, where she found herself face to face with General Harrison for the first time. The general was exactly what she had expected from his reputation: tall, distinguished, with the kind of commanding presence that filled a room even when he was sitting quietly. But his eyes were what struck her most: intelligent, calculating, and somehow kind despite their intensity. "Sergeant Martinez," the general said, gesturing for her to take a seat across from him. "Thank you for coming. I watched your performance during yesterday's training exercise with great interest." Sarah felt her heart rate increase but maintained her military bearing. "Thank you, sir. I hope my team and I perform to your expectations." General Harrison smiled slightly, an expression that suggested he was impressed by her composure. "Your team performed well, but I'm more interested in discussing your individual capabilities. Your service record shows consistent excellence, but yesterday I saw something that can't be measured by standard metrics." He opened a thick folder that Sarah assumed contained her complete military file. The general reviewed several pages before continuing, his expression thoughtful and analytical. "Tell me about your background before military service," he said. "I understand you studied engineering?" Sarah provided a brief overview of her civilian education and her reasons for enlisting, carefully avoiding the more personal details about her brother's death. She had learned early in her military career that emotional vulnerability, while human, wasn't always appropriate in professional military discussions. The general listened intently, occasionally asking follow-up questions that demonstrated he had already done considerable research into her background. He seemed particularly interested in her problem-solving approaches and her ability to remain calm under pressure. "Sergeant Martinez, I'm going to be direct with you," General Harrison said, setting aside her file. "I'm here recruiting for a special unit that handles missions of the highest classification level. This unit operates under conditions that would challenge even our most experienced Special Forces personnel." Sarah felt a surge of excitement mixed with apprehension. Special operations had always seemed like something beyond her reach, reserved for soldiers with years more experience and training than she possessed. "The unit I'm describing operates under a specific code name," the general continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "We call it the Kraken unit, and membership is by invitation only. The selection process is rigorous, the training is intense, and the missions are unlike anything you've experienced in conventional military service." The name sent a chill through Sarah. She had heard whispers about Kraken unit during her time in service, rumors and half-stories, shared in hushed conversations among soldiers who claimed to know someone who knew someone who had encountered them. The stories were always vague but consistently portrayed Kraken operatives as soldiers who operated on a completely different level. "What exactly does Kraken unit do, sir?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite her growing excitement. General Harrison paused, choosing his words carefully. "Kraken unit handles situations that require absolute precision, complete discretion, and soldiers who can think independently while operating in isolation from traditional command structures. Our operatives work alone or in very small teams, often in hostile territory with minimal support and maximum responsibility." He went on to explain that Kraken operatives were deployed on missions that officially didn't exist, rescuing hostages in politically sensitive locations, eliminating high-value targets without creating international incidents, gathering intelligence in areas where conventional military presence would cause diplomatic problems. "The psychological demands are enormous," the general warned. "Kraken operatives must be able to make life-and-death decisions with incomplete information, operate for weeks without contact with command, and maintain their cover identities under extreme stress. Many excellent soldiers simply aren't suited for this type of work." Sarah absorbed this information, feeling both intimidated and thrilled by the possibilities. Everything about her military service had been building towards something like this, though she had never imagined such opportunities existed. "Why me, sir?" she asked. "There must be hundreds of soldiers with more experience and training." General Harrison leaned back in his chair, studying her with those penetrating eyes. "Experience can be gained and skills can be taught. But the qualities I observed in you yesterday, the ability to improvise under pressure, the tactical creativity, the calm decision-making in chaotic situations, those are natural attributes that can't be trained into someone who doesn't already possess them." He explained that Kraken unit recruitment wasn't based solely on traditional military metrics like marksmanship scores or physical fitness tests. Instead, they looked for soldiers who demonstrated specific psychological and intellectual characteristics that indicated they could handle the unique stresses of covert operations. "Your engineering background is also valuable," he added. "Kraken operatives often find themselves in situations where they need to understand complex systems, improvise technical solutions, or operate sophisticated equipment with minimal training. Your analytical thinking style is exactly what we need. The general outlined the next steps if Sarah was interested in pursuing selection. She would undergo a series of evaluations, physical, psychological, and tactical, designed to assess her suitability for Kraken operations. The process would take several weeks and would be conducted at a classified facility away from her current base. "I need to emphasize," General Harrison said, his tone becoming even more serious, "that this opportunity comes with significant personal costs. Kraken operatives maintain cover identities, have limited contact with family and friends, and face risks that go far beyond conventional military service. This isn't a decision to make lightly." Sarah sat in silence for several moments, processing everything she had heard. The opportunity was everything she had never dared to hope for. A chance to serve at the highest level, to make a real difference in situations that mattered on a global scale. "Sir," she said finally, "I'd like to proceed with the selection process." General Harrison nodded as if he had expected this response. "Very good, Sergeant. You'll receive orders within the next 48 hours. Until then, this conversation never happened, and you'll continue with your regular duties." As Sarah left Building 7, she felt as if she were walking into a completely different future than the one she had envisioned when she woke up that morning. The Kraken unit represented everything she had been unknowingly preparing for, and she was determined to prove herself worthy of the opportunity. 2 days later, Sarah found herself on a military transport aircraft heading to an undisclosed location, surrounded by a handful of other soldiers who had received similar mysterious orders. The atmosphere was tense with anticipation and uncertainty. None of them knew exactly what they were flying toward, but all sensed they were embarking on something that would fundamentally change their military careers. The flight lasted 6 hours, during which the candidates were forbidden from discussing their backgrounds or reasons for selection. Sarah spent the time studying her fellow passengers, trying to gauge what qualities they might share that had brought them all to this moment. There was a Navy SEAL who carried himself with quiet confidence, a Marine sniper whose calm demeanor reminded her of seasoned hunters she had known growing up, and an Air Force intelligence specialist who seemed to analyze everything around her with scientific precision. When they finally landed, Sarah was surprised to find herself at what appeared to be a civilian airport in the middle of nowhere. The landscape was harsh and mountainous, with no visible signs of military infrastructure. Their transportation from the airport was a series of unmarked vans that drove for another hour through increasingly remote terrain. Their destination was a compound that looked more like a corporate retreat center than a military training facility. The buildings were modern but understated, designed to blend into the natural environment. Only the discreet security measures, cameras, sensors, and guards who tried to look like maintenance staff revealed the site's true nature. The candidates were processed through an intake procedure that was more thorough than anything Sarah had experienced, even during her initial military enlistment. Medical examinations, psychological evaluations, polygraph tests, and background investigations that seemed to cover every aspect of her life since childhood. The message was clear. Kraken unit left nothing to chance when it came to personnel selection. Her first real challenge came during the psychological assessment phase. Dr. Rebecca Chen, a military psychologist with an impressive academic background, conducted interviews that probed far deeper than Sarah had expected. The questions weren't just about her military service but explored her motivations, fears, moral boundaries, and ability to cope with isolation and extreme stress. "Tell me about the most difficult decision you've ever made," Dr. Chen asked during one session. Her pen poised over a notepad that she rarely seemed to write in. Sarah thought carefully before responding. The easy answer would have been something military-related, but she sensed the psychologist was looking for something more fundamental about her character. "When my brother died, I had to decide whether to let my grief consume me or find a way to channel it into something productive," Sarah said. "For months I was barely functional. The easy choice would have been to stay in that dark place, but I realized that wouldn't honor his memory or help anyone else." Dr. Chen nodded, making a brief note. "And you chose military service as that productive channel?" "Initially, yes, but over time I realized it wasn't just about finding direction for my grief. Military service gave me a sense of purpose that I didn't know I was looking for. It taught me that I could be part of something larger than my personal problems." The psychological evaluation continued for 3 days, covering everything from ethical dilemmas to stress responses to leadership philosophy. Sarah found the process exhausting but also illuminating, as the questions forced her to examine aspects of her personality and motivations that she had never fully considered. The physical assessment phase was unlike any fitness test she had experienced in conventional military training. Rather than focusing on raw strength or endurance, the evaluators seemed more interested in her ability to maintain mental clarity while under physical stress, her pain tolerance, and her capacity to continue functioning when exhausted. Exercise required her to navigate a complex obstacle course while solving mathematical problems and responding to tactical scenarios presented through a headset. The physical challenges were demanding but manageable. The real test was maintaining cognitive function while her body was pushed to its limits. Another assessment involved survival scenarios where candidates were dropped into simulated hostile environments with minimal equipment and required to complete objectives while avoiding capture. Sarah found herself alone in a mock urban environment, tasked with gathering intelligence on enemy positions while evading patrol teams that were actively hunting for her. The exercise lasted 36 hours, during which Sarah had to manage fatigue, hunger, and the constant stress of potential discovery while maintaining focus on her mission objectives. She discovered capabilities within herself that she hadn't known existed, an ability to remain calm and analytical, even when exhausted and afraid. The tactical evaluation phase tested her ability to operate independently and make complex decisions without guidance. She was presented with scenarios that had no clear right answers, situations where any choice involved significant risks and potential negative consequences. One particularly challenging scenario involved a hostage rescue mission, where intelligence suggested the presence of non-combatant civilians in the target area. Sarah had to develop and execute a plan that balanced the need to rescue the hostages against the risk of civilian casualties, all while operating with incomplete information and time pressure that made second-guessing impossible. Her approach impressed the evaluators not because it was flawless. There was no perfect solution to the scenario, but because she demonstrated the ability to make difficult decisions quickly and then execute them with confidence despite uncertainty about the outcome. Throughout the evaluation process, candidates were eliminated at each stage. The Navy SEAL was dropped during the psychological assessment, apparently unable to meet the psychological profile requirements for long-term isolation operations. The Marine sniper excelled at individual skills, but struggled with the independent decision-making requirements that were central to Kraken operations. By the end of the second week, only 3 candidates remained from the original group of 12. Sarah found herself alongside Thompson, a Special Forces medic with extensive combat experience, and Garcia, a former CIA operative who had transitioned to military service. All 3 had demonstrated the rare combination of technical skills, psychological resilience, and independent thinking that Kraken unit required. The final evaluation was conducted by General Harrison himself, who arrived at the facility for individual interviews with the remaining candidates. When Sarah entered the conference room for her final assessment, she felt more confident than she had at any point during the process. The evaluations had pushed her to her limits, but they had also revealed capabilities she hadn't known she possessed. Sergeant Martinez, the general said, reviewing what she assumed was her complete evaluation file, "You've performed exceptionally well throughout this process. Before I make my final decision, I want you to understand exactly what you're volunteering for." He explained that Kraken operatives typically worked alone or in 2-person teams, often deep in hostile territory with no possibility of immediate support or extraction. They maintained cover identities for months at a time, living false lives while gathering intelligence or waiting for mission activation. The psychological isolation was intense, and the margin for error was essentially 0. "Your performance here suggests you have the capabilities we need," General Harrison continued, "but I need you to be absolutely certain this is what you want. Once you join Kraken Unit, your previous life effectively ends. You'll maintain minimal contact with family and friends, your service record will be classified, and you'll operate under identities that we create for you." Sarah had been thinking about this moment throughout the evaluation process. Everything she had learned about Kraken Unit both excited and terrified her. but she knew with absolute certainty that this was the direction she wanted her life to take. "Sir, I understand the sacrifices involved and I'm ready to make them," she said. "This is exactly the kind of service I want to provide." General Harrison nodded, a slight smile crossing his face. "Welcome to Kraken Unit Operative Martinez." Sarah's transformation from regular soldier to Kraken operative began immediately after her selection. She was transferred to a highly classified training facility, hidden within what appeared to be a private corporate campus in rural Virginia. The location was so secret that even her new identification documents listed her as an employee of a technology consulting firm that existed only as a cover for Kraken unit operations. Her training partner was Elena Vasquez, a former Delta Force operator who had been with Kraken unit for 3 years. Elena would serve as Sarah's mentor during the intensive 6-month program that would prepare her for active operations. From their first meeting, it was clear that Elena took her role seriously and expected nothing less than perfection from her new partner. "Everything you think you know about military operations, forget it," Elena told Sarah during their first training session. "Kraken operatives don't follow standard procedures because standard procedures get you killed when you're operating alone in hostile territory. We improvise, adapt, and survive by thinking differently than everyone else." The training program was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. Instead of focusing on large unit tactics, every exercise was designed for individual or small team operations. She learned advanced surveillance techniques, how to maintain cover identities under intense scrutiny, and ways to blend into civilian populations in countries where discovery would mean death. Language training was particularly intensive. Sarah already spoke basic Spanish from her childhood, but Kraken operatives were expected to achieve near-native fluency in multiple languages. Over the course of her training, she developed operational-level proficiency in Arabic, Russian, and Mandarin Chinese, spending hours each day in immersion sessions with native speakers who tested not just her vocabulary, but her ability to adopt appropriate cultural behaviors. The technical training was equally demanding. Sarah learned to operate sophisticated surveillance equipment, hack into computer networks, and use weapon systems that weren't part of standard military arsenals. Her engineering background proved invaluable as she quickly mastered electronic surveillance devices, communications encryption, and improvised explosive techniques. One of the most challenging aspects of her training was learning to maintain multiple cover identities simultaneously. Sarah practiced being Jessica Thompson, a freelance journalist, Maria Rodriguez, a cultural exchange student, and Dr. Sarah Mitchell, an academic researcher. Each identity had complete documentation, background stories, and behavioral patterns that she had to maintain perfectly under any circumstances. "Your cover identity isn't just about documents and fake names," Elena explained during one particularly intense role-playing exercise. "It's about becoming that person completely. You have to think like them, react like them, and believe in that identity so thoroughly that you could pass a polygraph test while maintaining your cover." The psychological aspects of cover identity maintenance were more difficult than Sarah had anticipated. Living as someone else for extended periods created a strange form of dissociation that required careful mental discipline to manage. She learned meditation techniques, memory palace methods, and psychological anchoring strategies that allowed her to maintain her core sense of self, while operating under false identities. Combat training at the Kraken level was far more sophisticated than conventional military instruction. Rather than learning to fight as part of a unit, Sarah mastered techniques for surviving encounters when completely outnumbered and isolated. She studied urban combat, wilderness survival, escape and evasion, and silent elimination techniques that could neutralize threats without alerting nearby enemies. Elena pushed Sarah to her absolute limits during sparring sessions, simulated capture scenarios and endurance challenges that tested both physical and mental resilience. The training was designed to prepare her for the worst possible situations she might encounter in the field. "Pain is temporary, but failure is permanent," Elena would say during particularly brutal training sessions. "When you're alone behind enemy lines with no backup coming, your ability to push through pain and exhaustion is often the only thing standing between mission success and catastrophic failure." As Sarah's training progressed, she began to understand why Kraken unit was so selective in its recruitment. The psychological demands of extended isolation, the technical complexity of the equipment and procedures, and the physical requirements of operating alone in hostile environments eliminated most soldiers long before they reached operational status. Her first major milestone came during a comprehensive field exercise that lasted 3 weeks. Sarah was given the cover, identity of an environmental researcher and deployed to a simulated hostile country with instructions to gather intelligence on enemy military installations while maintaining her civilian cover. The exercise took place in a realistic training environment populated by role players who didn't know she was a trainee. From their perspective, she was simply another visiting researcher, and they were instructed to report any suspicious behavior to the exercise controllers who played the part of enemy intelligence services. Sarah had to maintain her cover while conducting surveillance, recruiting local assets, and gathering detailed intelligence on target installations. The challenge required her to balance the aggressive intelligence gathering that her mission demanded against the cautious behavior that would keep her cover identity intact. During the second week of the exercise, Sarah encountered her first major crisis. One of the role players became suspicious of her activities and began conducting counter-surveillance that threatened to expose her true purpose. She had to decide whether to abort the mission, eliminate the threat, or find a creative solution that would neutralize the danger without compromising her objectives. Sarah chose a third option that impressed her trainers. She deliberately allowed herself to be observed conducting what appeared to be romantic encounters with another role player, creating a plausible alternative explanation for her suspicious behavior. The counter-surveillance team concluded she was conducting an extramarital affair rather than espionage activities, and she was able to continue her mission without further interference. The exercise concluded with Sarah successfully gathering all required intelligence while maintaining her cover identity throughout the 3-week period. Her performance report noted exceptional adaptability, creative problem-solving, and the kind of independent thinking that made Kraken operatives effective in real-world situations. As her training neared completion, Sarah began to receive briefings about actual Kraken unit operations. The missions were exactly what General Harrison had described: high-stakes operations in politically sensitive areas where conventional military action was impossible. Kraken operatives had rescued hostages from terrorist organizations, eliminated weapons dealers who were supplying hostile governments, and gathered intelligence that prevented international incidents. Elena shared stories from her own operational experience, carefully avoiding classified details while giving Sarah a realistic understanding of what her new career would involve. The missions were dangerous, the isolation was intense, and the psychological toll was significant, but the impact of successful Kraken operations on national security was immeasurable. The hardest part isn't the physical danger, Elena explained during one of their final training sessions. It's the isolation and the knowledge that if something goes wrong, you're completely on your own. But it's also the most rewarding work you'll ever do, because every successful mission potentially saves lives and protects interests that matter on a global scale. As Sarah prepared for her first operational assignment, she reflected on how completely her life had changed since that morning when she had been cleaning her rifle and General Harrison had first noticed her. The scared, grieving college dropout who had enlisted in the military 3 years ago was gone, replaced by a highly trained operative capable of handling missions that few people could even imagine. Her transformation was complete, but her real journey as a Kraken operative was just beginning. Sarah's first operational assignment came 8 months after her initial selection, following her successful completion of advanced training and a final evaluation that tested every skill she had developed as a Kraken operative. The mission briefing took place in a secure facility that she had never seen before, emphasizing the compartmentalized nature of Kraken unit operations. General Harrison personally conducted the briefing, accompanied by intelligence analysts and technical specialists who provided detailed background information about her target. The mission involved infiltrating a weapons trafficking network operating in Eastern Europe, specifically focused on a group that was supplying advanced military equipment to terrorist organizations across 3 continents. Viktor Kozlov runs what appears to be a legitimate import-export business in Prague, General Harrison explained, displaying surveillance photos on the briefing room's main screen. Intelligence indicates he's actually coordinating the sale of stolen NATO weapons to groups that pose direct threats to American interests abroad. The complexity of the mission immediately impressed Sarah. This wasn't a simple elimination or intelligence-gathering operation. She would need to establish a cover identity, gain access to Kozlov's organization, gather evidence of his illegal activities, and identify his network of suppliers and buyers, all while operating completely alone in a foreign country where discovery would likely mean death. Her cover identity was Dr. Sarah Mitchell, an art history professor from a small American university who was researching Eastern European cultural artifacts. The identity had been established over several months, complete with published academic papers, university employment records, and a social media presence that would withstand intense scrutiny. The technical team provided her with sophisticated surveillance equipment disguised as academic research tools. A digital camera contained hidden recording devices. Her laptop included advanced hacking software masked as research databases, and even her jewelry contained tracking and communication devices that appeared to be decorative but could transmit information to satellite networks. Sarah spent 2 weeks in Prague, establishing her academic cover, making contact with legitimate researchers and museums while carefully positioning herself to encounter Kozlov's organization. Her engineering background proved invaluable as she navigated the complex technical requirements of maintaining covert communications. While appearing to conduct legitimate academic research, her breakthrough came during a gallery opening where Kozlov was known to appear as a patron of the arts. Sarah attended the event as Dr. Mitchell, striking up conversations about cultural preservation and the historical significance of Eastern European artifacts. When she finally encountered Kozlov, she was ready with a carefully rehearsed persona that would appeal to his interests. Kozlov was charming, sophisticated, and clearly intelligent, exactly the type of criminal who posed the greatest danger because he operated behind a facade of legitimate business activities. He expressed interest in Dr. Mitchell's research, particularly her supposed expertise in authentication techniques for military artifacts and historical weapons. Over the following weeks, Sarah carefully developed her relationship with Kozlov, meeting him for coffee to discuss cultural preservation and attending social events where his business associates were present. She learned to navigate the complex social dynamics of his organization while gathering intelligence about his operations. The most dangerous moment came when Kozlov invited her to examine some historical military pieces in his private collection. Sarah realized this was both an opportunity to gather crucial evidence and a test of her cover identity. If Kozlov suspected her true purpose, this invitation could be a trap designed to expose her as an intelligence operative. The collection was housed in a warehouse facility outside Prague, heavily secured and clearly used for more than legitimate business activities. Sarah documented everything she could while maintaining her academic persona, commenting knowledgeably about the historical significance of weapons that she recognized as recently stolen NATO equipment. Her technical training allowed her to plant surveillance devices throughout the facility while appearing to conduct academic photography of the collection. The hidden cameras and recording equipment she deployed would provide ongoing intelligence about Kozlov's operations even after her mission concluded. The psychological pressure of maintaining her cover while operating in such close proximity to dangerous criminals was intense. Sarah had to suppress her natural tactical instincts and behave like a naive academic, even when she observed activities that clearly indicated illegal weapons trafficking. The mental discipline required to maintain this performance while gathering critical intelligence tested every aspect of her Kraken training. Her most significant intelligence breakthrough came when she overheard a conversation between Kozlov and his associates about an upcoming shipment to contacts in North Africa. The weapons involved included advanced anti-aircraft systems that could threaten civilian aviation if they fell into terrorist hands. Sarah faced a critical decision about how to handle this time-sensitive intelligence. Her mission parameters called for comprehensive intelligence gathering over several months, but the immediacy of the threat suggested that intervention might be necessary to prevent a catastrophic attack on civilian targets. She used her covert communication equipment to contact her handlers, transmitting the intelligence about the weapons shipment while requesting guidance about how to proceed. The response came back within hours. Maintain cover and continue gathering intelligence but prepare for possible emergency extraction if the situation became too dangerous. The final phase of her mission required Sarah to attend a business meeting where Kozlov would be finalizing arrangements with his international buyers. She attended the gathering as Dr. Mitchell, supposedly there to authenticate several historical pieces that were being used as cover for the weapons transactions. The meeting included representatives from terrorist organizations, arms dealers from multiple countries, and financial facilitators who laundered money for illegal weapon sales. Sarah recognized several faces from intelligence briefings as high-value targets who had been sought by international law enforcement for years. Using her hidden recording equipment, Sarah documented the entire meeting, capturing evidence that would allow law enforcement agencies to dismantle the network and prosecute everyone involved. The intelligence she gathered would prevent weapons from reaching terrorist organizations and eliminate a significant threat to international security. Her extraction from Prague was carefully orchestrated to avoid suspicion. Dr. Mitchell simply completed her research fellowship and returned to the United States, leaving behind a trail of legitimate academic work that reinforced her cover identity. Kozlov and his associates had no reason to suspect that their entire operation had been compromised. The mission's success exceeded all expectations. Within weeks of Sarah's return, coordinated international raids dismantled Kozlov's network, prevented the weapons shipment to North Africa, and captured several high-value terrorist facilitators. The intelligence she had gathered saved lives and disrupted terrorist operations across multiple continents. During her debriefing, General Harrison personally commended Sarah's performance, noting that her ability to maintain cover while gathering comprehensive intelligence demonstrated the highest levels of operational skill. Her success on such a complex first mission established her reputation within Kraken unit as an operative capable of handling the most challenging assignments. As Sarah prepared for her next mission, she reflected on how completely she had adapted to her new role. The transformation from regular soldier to elite operative was complete, and she had proven herself capable of operating at the highest levels of international intelligence work. 3 years and 17 successful missions later, Sarah had established herself as one of Kraken unit's most effective operatives. She had operated in 12 different countries, dismantled 3 major terrorist networks, and prevented attacks that could have killed thousands of innocent people. Her reputation within the intelligence community was legendary, though her existence remained known only to a select few individuals with the highest security clearances. The mission that would define her career came on a cold February morning when General Harrison summoned her for what he described as the most critical assignment Kraken unit had ever undertaken. The briefing took place in the same secure facility where she had received her first operational orders, but the atmosphere was more tense than anything she had experienced before. "We have a situation that threatens national security at the highest levels," General Harrison began, his expression more serious than Sarah had ever seen. "A sleeper agent network has been activated within our own military structure, and traditional investigation methods have proven ineffective because we don't know how deep the infiltration goes." The intelligence painted a disturbing picture. Foreign operatives had spent years establishing identities within the American military, rising through the ranks and gaining access to classified information and strategic facilities. Recent communication intercepts suggested they were preparing for a coordinated action that could compromise national defense capabilities. Sarah's mission was to infiltrate this network by assuming the identity of a military contractor with access to sensitive facilities. The operation would require her to work within the American military system, while hunting for enemies who had spent years perfecting their own cover identities. The challenge, General Harrison explained, is that these operatives have become so integrated into military culture that they're virtually indistinguishable from legitimate personnel. They think like soldiers, act like patriots, and have even formed genuine relationships within their units. Detecting them requires someone who understands both military culture and the psychology of long-term undercover operations. Sarah's cover identity was Rebecca Walsh, a cybersecurity consultant hired to evaluate security protocols at various military installations. The position would give her legitimate access to personnel files, communication systems, and facilities while providing a plausible reason for asking detailed questions about security procedures. The investigation began at Fort Braxton, a major military installation where intelligence suggested at least 3 sleeper agents were operating. Sarah established her cover identity and began the complex process of identifying potential foreign operatives among thousands of legitimate military personnel. Her engineering background proved crucial as she analyzed communication patterns, access logs, and behavioral data that might reveal inconsistencies in personnel who appeared to be model soldiers. The foreign operatives were sophisticated, but Sarah's unique combination of technical skills and operational experience allowed her to detect subtle patterns that conventional investigators had missed. The breakthrough came when Sarah noticed anomalies in the communication habits of certain personnel. While their official records showed typical military communication patterns, deeper analysis revealed encrypted message traffic that occurred at specific intervals and followed patterns consistent with foreign intelligence protocols. She identified Captain James Mitchell, a well-respected logistics officer who had been stationed at Fort Braxton for 4 years. Mitchell was popular with his colleagues, had received multiple commendations, and appeared to be a dedicated American soldier. However, Sarah's analysis revealed that his communication patterns and access behaviors were consistent with someone conducting systematic intelligence gathering. Confirming her suspicions required Sarah to get close to Mitchell without arousing his suspicion. She attended social events where he was present, struck up conversations about military logistics, and carefully probed his background knowledge in ways that would reveal inconsistencies in his cover story. The investigation became increasingly dangerous as Sarah realized the scope of the infiltration. Mitchell was part of a network that included personnel at multiple installations, coordinating their activities through sophisticated communication methods that had evaded detection for years. Sarah's most critical discovery came when she uncovered evidence that the sleeper network was planning to simultaneously compromise security at 3 major military installations, potentially gaining access to advanced weapon systems and classified strategic information. The timeline for their operation was accelerated, giving Sarah only days to identify all network members and coordinate their capture without alerting the remaining operatives. She worked around the clock, analyzing intelligence and coordinating with General Harrison to develop a comprehensive response plan. The climax came during a carefully orchestrated operation where Sarah had to maintain her cover identity while secretly coordinating the simultaneous arrest of 12 foreign operatives across multiple installations. The operation required precise timing and absolute secrecy to prevent any of the sleeper agents from escaping or destroying evidence. Sarah's role was to ensure that Captain Mitchell was captured with evidence that would implicate the entire network. She arranged a meeting with him under the pretense of discussing security vulnerabilities, secretly recording his responses to questions that would reveal his true allegiances. When Mitchell realized he was being investigated, he attempted to activate emergency protocols that would alert the remaining network members. Sarah had to make a split-second decision to break her cover and prevent him from compromising the entire operation. The confrontation was brief, but intense. Mitchell was a trained operative who had spent years preparing for the possibility of exposure. However, Sarah's Kraken training and operational experience gave her the advantage she needed to neutralize the threat and preserve the evidence that would convict the entire network. The operation's success was complete. All 12 sleeper agents were captured simultaneously, preventing them from destroying evidence or alerting foreign handlers. The intelligence gathered from their capture led to the identification and neutralization of similar networks in allied countries. General Harrison's debriefing emphasized the historical significance of Sarah's achievement. The sleeper network had posed one of the most serious internal security threats in decades, and her ability to detect and neutralize it had prevented what could have been a catastrophic intelligence disaster. Your work on this operation represents the pinnacle of what Kraken Unit was designed to accomplish, General Harrison told Sarah during their final meeting. You've proven that our operatives can handle threats that conventional military and intelligence services simply cannot address. As Sarah prepared for her next assignment, she reflected on her journey from a grieving college student who had stumbled into military service to an elite operative capable of protecting national security at the highest levels. Her brother's death had started her on this path, But her own determination and capabilities had carried her to heights she had never imagined possible. The transformation was complete, but Sarah knew her work was far from over. In a world where threats constantly evolved and enemies operated in the shadows, Kraken unit operatives like herself stood as the last line of defense against those who would harm innocent people. It was a responsibility she had earned through years of sacrifice and dedication, and one she would continue to fulfill, with the same determination that had carried her through every challenge since that morning when General Harrison had first noticed her potential. Her vest bore the Kraken unit insignia now, a symbol known only to those who operated at the highest levels of military and intelligence work. It represented not just her individual achievements, but her commitment to protecting others and serving something greater than herself. The scared young woman who had enlisted seeking direction for her grief had become a guardian operating in the shadows, protecting a world that would never know her name but was safer because of her service.